in a way, there are two standard views of federalism. One of the things I was reading said, well, and of course we all know that federalism in America came out of the British Empire. So the colonists had lived under these multiple levels of government with their towns and then their colonies and then the authorities in Great Britain, and that sort of transmuted into American federalism with the states and the national government, and that was sort of a seamless transition. So that's one story, kind of the history story. And then at the same time, on the law side, I think there's a sense that federalism was invented, really invented, out of the blue at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. And the geniuses that we all love to read about sat down in the room and invented it. So there's sort of the standard story on the one hand of continuity, and on the other hand of change and invention. And I thought there's sort of something in between. And my story in my book, The Ideological Origins of American Federalism, which is coming out from Harvard University Press, it's sort of both. It's both that the ideas were around of having divided government and ideas that came out of Anglo-American law and continental European philosophy and political philosophy, but that the exigencies of the colonial circumstance and then the resistance to Great Britain made the ideas change in important ways, beginning really in the 1760s and then continuing to the 1780s and 1790s. In the 1760s and 1770s, the colonists, who were Americans but thought of themselves as British subjects, British North Americans maybe, had a lot of actual political and constitutional debates with representatives of the British Empire. It was in 1773, the debates were printed in the Boston newspapers. Ordinary people really paid attention and were interested in these debates, and yet it was at the level of kind of high constitutional theory, but it mattered for taxation, it mattered for whether the colonial legislatures would be able to pass laws governing really all aspects of local life, or whether those laws could be vetoed by authorities in Britain. So that's one of the earliest moments, I think, where the Americans start thinking, really as an opposition philosophy, about having these multiple layers of government, of legislature within the British Empire. And then in the 1770s and 80s, that idea shifts even more to start becoming independent. They start thinking we can be an independent nation. But it's really in the 1760s and 70s when they start articulating this theory, which comes from within the British imperial system. And one of the most interesting things also about the way early Americans thought about federalism was that it actually had a really strong international component. And you can see this in some of the early discussions in the founding period in particular, where people like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, who were certainly well versed in this law of nations European political philosophy, had attitudes about how their nation, how the Federal Republic would come together. In the late 1770s and early 1780s, John Adams referred in a letter to the Massachusetts congressional delegation as our embassy. So they really regarded their representatives in Congress as the ambassadors of Massachusetts to this general government, the United States and Congress assembled, which I think shows that, yes, they were building a nation, and that was a large part of their focus, but they also had a very strong sense that the colonies and then the states mattered and had individual roles, and that it was important to think of the government, the general government, as bringing them all together in a kind of league. So the shift to building an actual nation was actually quite gradual and took place over the 1770s, even though these ideas about changing the constitutional basis of the empire were fermenting all along in that period. Well, I think they're important because often there's a story about American federalism that says it was necessary, that it was kind of a way of saying, look, we have states and we have a general government. This is now around the time of the Revolution, and we're sort of stuck with them, so we need to come up with a theory that will accommodate them, because we can't just have a completely unitary government like France, for instance, where all authority really comes from the center. And so in modern debates, for instance, in modern constitutional law, federalism is always this huge subject of debate. It's a background norm. We try to think about how it should inform decisions of the Supreme Court or acts of Congress or the states. But there's always this question of, well, what does it really mean? And of course, the meaning of federalism has changed over 2+ centuries. But the original conception of it as a real idea and a way of having multiple levels of government within one, I think, is still important and still can inform our understanding of how it should operate today, and something that is uniquely institutionalized in the United States And that was part of the awareness people had in the early period of the revolution and after.